about the heart in general, what the sounds are, and a couple of other things. So when you're listening to the heart with a stethoscope, you are actually listening to the valves, the four valves that are involved in the heart. You're listening to those close. So the very first sound, when you're thinking about the sound of a heart, we say lub dub or lub dup. And so the first sound, the lub sound, is the AV valves closing. And so what that is beginning, it's going to begin systole, which is also another word for contraction. And so basically the valves close, so the ventricles are getting ready to then contract. The second sound is when the semilunar valves close. And that's going to be at the beginning of ventricular diastole, which is the relaxation of the ventricle. So we have something called the cardiac cycle, and cardiac cycle refers to all of the events that are associated with the blood flowing one way through the heart. And like I said before, systole is just another word for contraction of the heart, and diastole is relaxation. Now, we can figure out the cardiac output. And so the cardiac output, because you want your heart pumping, well, and you want that blood flowing throughout your body and being oxygenated, etc. And so the cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped by each ventricle in 1 minute. And so what you can, or how you can figure this out, is the heart rate in 1 minute, how many times your heart beats, and the stroke volume. And so the heart rate is the number of beats per minute, and stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped out by each ventricle with each beat. And this is an important number, this cardiac output, because you want enough oxygen flowing throughout your body and nutrients so that your cells can do what your cells need to do, and then in turn the tissues, organs, etc. So the regulation of the stroke volume. So the stroke volume equals the end diastolic volume, and that's relaxation. So how much blood you have when it's not contracting minus how much blood you have left after contraction. So EDV, end diastolic volume, the amount of blood collected in each ventricle when it's relaxed. So that means that the atria have contracted and the blood has gone to the ventricle. And then the ventricle is going to contract. Now, not every drop of blood will be pushed out at every ventricular contraction. So there's going to be a little bit of blood remaining that falls back to the bottom, and that's your end systolic volume. Now, we do have a reflex. Reflexes are, it's a sympathetic reflex. So basically, this is going to be a reflex that you don't control. It's involuntary. Reflexes are involuntary. And it's called either the atrial or Bainbridge reflex. And this is going to initiate the SA node to be stimulated. And so what it is, what happens is as blood starts to increase in the atria, it's going to cause that SA node to fire. And then all of those conduction steps will then be followed. Now, unfortunately, sometimes people have weak heart muscle, and it can be caused by all kinds of things. It can be caused by drugs, it can be caused by alcohol, but it could be also caused by high blood pressure. It can be caused by high cholesterol levels, etc. So what congenital heart failure means is that your heart is not pumping at full capacity. And so it can also be caused by multiple myocardial infarcts, which are just, they're small, basically like heart attacks. And when you have a heart attack, the portion of the muscle actually dies and is no longer able to contract. Now, when we were in the womb and we were developing, our heart definitely did not look like it does today. And so it starts with these two tubes. And basically these two tubes fuse, and what those two tubes are going to eventually give us is all four of our chambers. And so you can see that they fuse together, then we start to actually twist. So as those two twist, and you can see it here in the fetus, then we end up twisting into what is today the four-chambered heart. Now, in the womb, we are not breathing. So our lungs are not functional. They're actually one of the last things that develop when we were in the womb. And it is because we are not breathing underwater. Well, we can't breathe underwater. So we have mucus plugs that plug our throat and our nose so that we are not breathing a bunch of water into our lungs. So what happens is we have to bypass pulmonary circulation. So we are not pumping blood to our lungs and back while we're in the womb. So we actually have these holes in our heart. We're all born with a hole in our heart. If the hole persists, then it becomes an issue. But so the first hole is called the foramen ovale, and that is going to connect the two atria. So we're bypassing, again, the pulmonary circuit. And then we also have something called the ductus arteriosus, and that connects the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, another hole. And again, we're just bypassing the lungs until we are then born. And so when we're born, we are going to, the mucus plugs are pulled out, and we are going to start breathing. Once we start breathing, that's going to allow us for that pulmonary circuit to become functional. Now, unfortunately, as we get older, things do happen to our heart, and so there are some things that can happen, but of course we want to make sure that we're always healthy. Exercising, your heart is a muscle, so you do need to exercise your heart. So we can have sclerosis and thickening of the valve flaps. So what happens is the valves become, well, they're not as functional, so we have a little bit of backflow, of maybe a heart murmur. You can get your you can get actual valve replacements. It's a fairly simple procedure. You have a decline in cardiac reserve. You can have fibrosis of the cardiac muscle, which means that fibers, connective tissue fibers, are going to replace the cardiac muscle, which they don't contract. So your heart's not going to be able to contract with as much power. And then arterial sclerosis is basically the hardening of the arteries. So you can get plaque buildup and cholesterol buildup in those.